Okay, I just wanted to post a quick little video, something that I'm working on. And I'm just going to load this to various places. So, first of all, this is the loop and loop that I've made for this. Nice and flexible, ready to go, 7.5 inches. That's all fine and dandy. For this piece, what I'm doing is I'm going to produce a hidden toggle. So it looks like this, goes together, pops through. This side gets hinged to one side, and this guy gets hinged to the other side. Now, when you look at this, there's a couple things that I'm missing. One, I'm missing end caps for here, and these are way too small. So I am in the process of redoing this. So this is silver and gold. This will be cast in silver, and then I have a more substantial bracelet clasp for this whole thing. So one of the things I wanted to show you is this little thing here. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit here. So this is cuttlefish cast, one piece, and I'm going to mold it. So what I've got here is a brass rod with a tube in it, a hole in the end of the rod. And what I want to do is I want to have this hole perpendicular to the mold line on the cuttle bone so that it's facing up. And then that way, when it's inside, sorry guys, when it's inside the mold, this part will stay in the mold, and then this will be the wax that's removed. So to do this, I'm a traditional rubber mold sort of guy. So to do this, I'm going to use, this is gold label. I use gold or white, it doesn't really matter for the most part. I always make sure I have at least one layer more. For this, I'm going to be using a triangular button. I do have round ones as well, but I'm going to cut 3 of these because that's the space I need for the button. When you're doing this, be aware that you should really solder your sprue to the button if you're a beginner, or sorry, sprue to the piece. If you're a beginner, it does make the mold a little easier to cut. However, I'm not a beginner at this, so I'm not going to bother. So what you can do to make your life easier, sorry, I have a pen here, is you can just outline roughly where this is going to go like that, so that I can cut that out, and I know that's actually going to go off the end. So I'm going to cut that out. Every time you cut the rubber, you want to make sure that there's no little bits of rubber inside there. So check it. You don't want that up against your piece. And then in here, this is going to go this way, like I said, with that hole facing up, because when I cut this mold, I'm not going to remove the brass bar. It's going to stay inside the mold, and the rubber is there to make sure, or sorry, the hole is there to make sure that it's encapsulated and I don't accidentally remove that rod. That way I can't lose it. So that's basically the outline of my piece. And how I cut this, how many layers I cut this, really is determined by how thick my piece is that I'm cutting. I'm only going to cut through one layer on this one, based on the fact that it will have the same number of layers above and below. And we're just going to cut that. Now again, I'm going to clean that to make sure there's no little bits like that piece there. If that was up against my piece, it could ruin the mold. So I'm going to start with one below. One with a notch. Be aware that each mold has a smooth side, and I'll show you that on this one. It has a smooth side and a crosshatch side. Crosshatch side, so there's a smooth side. The crosshatched side is right here. right there. And the reason for that is it lets the air escape from the mold so it's not trapped in there. Try not to get your greasy fingers all over the whole piece. So I keep my fingers on the edges as much as possible. Lay that out in there. Make sure that this is I have a mold frame that's a bit bigger. So now this is going to go in here, making sure that that hole is facing upwards. And then we pull this layer off here. So the other thing is I'm making sure that, I'm going to try to make sure that my mold line is in the correct location as well. And oops, took the wrong one off. That's brilliant. I'm supposed to take the gold side off first because that's the smooth side. So what I'm going to do to correct that is I'm going to set it down there, locate it, and then just push it down with this guy here so that I'm not. There we go. One more layer. Always a good idea to have more rubber than too little. If you don't have enough rubber, you're going to run into problems. So I look at this now and it actually is a slightly below the mold or almost exactly the right height. If I use this, there's a chance that it might not work. So instead, I would rather use 2 more pieces of rubber than have not enough. I'd rather have a little bit too much. So I'm going to put this one on this side and then I'm going to flip it over, put the other one on the bottom. What that does is it keeps the model in the middle of the casting area, or the rubber mold area, which is important because I have not soldered my button on. I'm going to push my button in, take off these 2 guys, push this into here. Now what I don't have, and I'm just gonna, you can see how there's a bit of rubber sticking out on both sides. When that rubber heats up, it's going to compress and take all the air out of that area, which is super important. And that way I have a little bit of extra rubber to fill in all the spaces. Now, these are brass plates. They just let you take them out of the vulcanizer after they're molded. But you can see here, I've written about face in reverse on this space. And what that is when I'm done with the mold, it'll come out with my company name on it. So I don't have to worry about writing my name on my molds. They're always right in there. And then this will go to the vulcanizer and then I'll cut it and I'll video the cutting when it's done and I'll put the 2 videos together. Okay, so here's the mold I just packed after it was poured. I'm just going to pop my button. Now I was always taught to do a zigzag pattern, so I'm going to start right here and I'm going to cut a tooth here and I'm just going to work my way around, not going too deep. The depth of my cut is based partially on what's inside the mold. That's one of the reasons why I like to cut and pack my molds myself and not have somebody else do it for me. So because my piece is small, I can actually make a slightly deeper cut than I normally would here. And I'm just going to make my way all the way around the edge. And these teeth are just going to lock it into place when I'm going to pour or inject wax into it. This is my clamp. I'm just going to hold that there. Now, as I said before, I did not attach my button, or my sprue I should say, to my piece. I just had it lined up perfectly. There we go. You can see the cap in there. Now, one of the things I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to try to get this perfectly along the edge here so that I can so that I can get a nice good mold line. Now I'm going to try to pull it out before. It's really hot, so I'm going to have a cloth. I'm going to pull it out before I'm done because it should just slide out. Now I still have that brass piece in there. That's what you're seeing now is that brass piece. So this is going to allow me to do a nice straight cut along the edge there. And again, another straight cut along this edge. Now I am not cutting out this bar. I'm going to leave the bar. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it on one side. So I'm going to cut above. Because remember, I left that piece of material there. So I'm going to leave that bar. When I'm done cutting this off and the mold cools, I'm going to bring my camera over to my wax injector, and I'll finish the video off showing you how that bar does what it's supposed to do. I do cut my molds hot. It cuts it a little bit better. So I'm just going to put a vent line right there. I like to cut my vent lines all the way to the edge as well. And on this side here, I'm going to take that little bit of extra rubber off of there. I'm going to put a vent line on either side here like that. And again, I'm going to run that straight to the edge. I don't have to run them all the way to the edge. There's not going to be that much air trapped. I just have always felt that it works better. So now I'm going to cut this extra flange off, holding it in my clamp. I'm just going to cut it off with my scalpel, like so. I know a lot of people talc their molds, and so they don't actually have to cut them. I just was never taught that way. I don't have a problem cutting a mold, and kind of, you know, it's probably a little old-fashioned of me, but I don't think if it works well, then why not finish? Just keep up doing what's working if it's working. So what I will do is, as soon as I'm done this, I'm just going to add I'm going to take the camera over to the wax injector in a second here. Now one thing, because I didn't solder my sprue to my piece, now you can see how it basically didn't affect my cut at all. Because I didn't attach my sprue, you can see right here there's still a little flap. I'm just going to remove that, and I'm going to remove this little piece here, and I'm going to check the other side and do the same thing. Now one thing, there's a little bit of a flap right there. That's because this bar didn't quite fit inside my my piece, but that's okay because there's going to be some shrinkage. Okay, so here's the mold. I've already tried it a couple times just to make sure it was okay. So a little bit of mold release on the bar as well, and then paying attention to which side is the top. And the reason I want to know which side the top is because that's the side that releases the easiest. And so when I pull the mold apart, I want to make sure that I pull the side off that's going to release the easiest, so that the bar side, the part that has the bar encased in it, will hold on to the piece and let this piece stay in form, and then I'll be able to release it from there. Now it's very important that I don't open that up prematurely, because if I do, I'm going to have a mold that doesn't work. So while that's doing its thing, I'm going to just check for another mold here. Let's see, what is this one here? This is my swallow. I usually do a few molds at a time. There's no point while that one's cooling off. And this is what I was talking about in the previous video. You can see my name is in the mold. Now while this one's cooling off, I can open the other one, and you just go back and forth. Usually about 3 or 4 molds is the ideal number, depending on how long it takes to cool down in between. So let's just see if this one is ready to go yet. So again, I know where my piece is. That's the piece in there. You can see the brass bar sticking out the bottom. Now, every time you do this, you're going to have, they all take a little bit of different techniques. So I'm going to release the top there. And that sits. So you can see how that's just sticking out like that. And then I can release it from here like that. And then that gives me a cap with piece. Now, one thing I did notice is that the bar shifted out of the piece or off the piece during the rubber molding. So it's a little bit shallower here than I would like. So I'm going to have to go in and clean up and deepen that hole. Or I could make another rubber mold, but I suspect that I'm not going to use this more than 10 or 20 times. So it's not really in my best interest to make another mold in this situation. So I am going to pull 2, and the reason for making a mold is because if I ever do this chain, there's a few other pieces that I'll probably use this cap for. So, for the $5 and 20 minutes worth of work that it takes to make the rubber mold, it's not a bad idea. So I'll let that one sit. Here's the swallow. Now before I pull it out of here, I'm going to release the button. So I do mold most of my cuttlefish. That's my cuttlefish swallow. And then I will lost wax cast this later, or have it lost wax. Now this little flare or flashing, I'll take that off. That's basically from the mold. And I'll clean that off before it goes to the casters. Anyways, so let's just get the second one. You can see how it's still kind of dark right there. That means it's not quite solidified yet, or cooled off, I should say. So on this here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the drill bit. That's this size, and I'm just going to drill it out a little bit before it's cast so that I don't have as much material silver in there as... There we go. And let that cool off a bit more, because now that it's exposed, a little bit more hardening isn't a bad thing. So now I just broke the sprue off, but that doesn't really matter. So I have it free floating again. I can just pull that off, and then I can cast that, and I'll have to add a new sprue to that one, but there we go. Super fun.